Hoff, hello. How are you doing?
Doing great. What's going on, Pete?
Oh man, I'm super pumped to be hanging out with you. I haven't seen you for a hot second. When was that MSP event or MSP Atrium event in New York? Was that in October or was it a little bit earlier than that? I can't
It was
remember. I
even
gotta get
before
back.
that. That was
Really?
great.
Yeah, I gotta get back on there. Although, the drinks at Jungle Bird there in Chelsea, kind of aggressive. Um, awesome. Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanjy. We're gonna give everyone just a few minutes to join here. While we're doing that, Mike, you got any travel plans coming up here, man, over the holidays? What's the deal?
I do. I'm actually going on my honeymoon in early Jan to the Maldives. So pumped about that.
That's amazing. The Maldives, that's like right in the middle of the ocean, right?
Like in the middle of nowhere, Southeast Asia, kind of. And I'm excited, but my wife, I just got married. It's still weird to say that. She can lay on the huts in the water for hours. I'm not as good at that. So I don't really know what I'm going to do with myself, but I know it's going to be fun.
Nice. All right, I'll send you some books. The one I'm obsessed with recently is the Jolt Effect. It's a new sales book. I'm liking that one, so I'll make sure to send that out to you. Awesome. Well, we can start getting jamming here. So while people are joining, just take a few minutes to get familiar with the Zoom interface here. We welcome audience participation, so please do use the chat panel, leverage the Q&A panel, so on and so forth. And just kind of let us know, like, what in the chat where you're calling in from, and also what you're most excited to kind of learn from Mike here, an illustrious member of the New York SaaS sales leadership community. So for folks who are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related disciplines. And the community's mission is pretty straightforward. It's to create an environment for our 30,000 and growing members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about. And so the way that we do that is through great live sessions like what you're about to experience today, through our robust online forum, and also in-person events. So for those who are not previously admitted, you should have access to community now. Before we get started, Power Hour is a little bit of a unique format. There's not really a specific piece of content we're talking through. Instead, we're here to pick the brain of our illustrious guests, Mr. Mike here. And so please do participate, ask questions, et cetera, et cetera. So the reminder is that you're here to learn, please use the Q&A, et cetera. So with that, let's do some introductions here. I'll make mine super quick because I'm less interesting than Mike. My name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps sales leaders, managers, and reps use metrics to improve team performance. Prior to Atrium, I started a software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And subsequent to that, wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and started Modern Sales Pros. But enough about me. Mike here is absolutely fantastic. I've known him for, I want to say, about like 5 years right now. I feel that I'm like, through Mike and some other folks, I'm in tight with the New York SaaS sales leadership, kind of like mafia. So I'm really pumped to have him here on the show today. Mike, maybe you can share with folks a little bit of what you spend your time doing at Spring, and maybe a couple of the roles that you had before then.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, really pumped to be here, Pete. I'm currently VP of Sales at Spring Health, so oversee part of the sales team here, and scaling and growing like a lot of emerging tech companies. My career has been primarily in revenue leadership positions at different companies, mostly in New York City, running sales and account management teams. Spring Health is the sixth company I've been at, so I've seen a lot of different stages of growth and have learned through a lot of different challenges.
That's awesome. And what's the TLDR on what Spring provides as an offering, who you guys sell to, just so folks are kind of familiar with, like, the sort of sales motions that you're spending your time working on these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So Spring Health is a mental health company that provides mental health benefits, so primarily therapy and coaching sessions and meditation exercises and things like that,
Wow.
to employers as benefits to offer to their employees. So it's a mental health benefit.
That's awesome. Excellent. Well, so if folks have questions around HR go to market, right? Because I imagine the buyer is probably HR benefits, et cetera, like, or health tech go to market. We know that Mike is here to kind of help with that. Cool. So let's go ahead and like dive into a couple of kind of questions that were submitted ahead of time here. So I mean, I think that one of the things I know you as a multi-time Atrium customer, and you're a very data-driven guy. I think, did you do finance undergrad, or did you do what was the that you did at Drexel?
I
Yeah,
did finance and entrepreneurship undergrad.
yeah. So not surprising that you are know your way around a spreadsheet, know your way around the math, et cetera. But I think the interesting thing there is like, how, depending on the sales motion or depending on the sales organization, how you look at data is going to be different depending on that organization and that sales motion. How do you think about that, given the fact that like Spring has a different sales motion than CB Insights has a different sales motion than 15.5 has a different sales motion than single platform, et cetera? Like, how do you think about data appropriateness at each, like depending on the sales motion?
Yeah, it's very different based on the company. And I think that some people have a playbook and they like to run that playbook at every company, but you need
Right.
to adjust like crazy. I mean, Spring, we have a very cyclical sale where 80% of our revenue is coming in Q4, but we need to make sure
Really?
we're on track all year. And that's very different than CB Insights, which was a little more transactional in nature, a quicker sale, less
Yeah.
cyclical. So the data you look at, the reps you hire, the way you manage the team is almost apples and oranges.
That's how interesting. So tell me a little bit more about that as relates to Spring. So why is everything so like backloaded like that? Is that the result of like open enrollment or things like that, or what's the deal there?
Exactly. So most companies, not all, like to launch their benefits 1/1. So because of that,
Oh,
people will be evaluating all year, but they won't actually launch until 1/1. The pro to that is I've never had a better impending event of people needing to sign by the end of the year. So that's really exciting.
gun to their head.
It's also interesting because everywhere else I've been, the expression like burbles are for gerbils or anything like that. At Spring,
Yes.
we actually look at our revenue based on like what's in procurement and closed, because
Yeah.
it's all gonna close by the end of the year. So when we get a verbal, that's it. We never knock on wood, get screwed out of that. So even like what we look at in terms of committed revenue is different at Spring.
That's so interesting. And I think that like, man, God, that would like stress me out so hard, having like everything backloaded like that. Because I'm trying to think, there's a number. This at this point, Atrium has like 300 customers, and so one of the things that's like really fun about my job is I get to interact with like all different types of sales motions. I'm trying to think of other folks like that. Like Gusto, I think is probably a good example there, because like people don't want to change their payroll software before like they're issuing 1099 or not 1099s, whatever it is, W2s, and so on and so forth. I feel that like education technology is pretty similar to this, insofar as like you have these like very, very specific procurement cycles where, because most of the buyers end up being kind of like public schools who then have like a budgetary cycle, and then of course there's like the whole like there's summer break and so on and so forth. But you see these like big like bumps in you see these like really big bumps in revenue and also like pipeline, but it's not like you can just kind of like sit around at like goofing off the rest of the year. It's like it's kind of like a squirrel kind of like putting nuts away, right? It's got like all year long, such that they're ready for the winter. How do you like manage that, like for other people that have like very cyclical sales motions? Like what's the mechanism by which you make sure that your reps are like actually like storing those nuts to then eat during the winter? Because like in February or in March or April, you'd be like, oh yeah, like, December, that's in like a long ass time. I have to worry about that. And then like, it's here sooner than you think. How do you kind of like drive that consistency in the meantime?
Exactly. And it's funny if you look at Atrium and like our close rates over the course of the year, they're also low because things haven't closed. So it's like people that don't understand our sale would ask, why is your close rate so much lower this year than last year? It's like, no, it's going to bump up significantly once we get to the end of the year. So we have to look at like conversion by stage and that kind of stuff to better understand how we're tracking. But it's to know how we're on track, there's a couple of things. One is just weighted pipeline. So if deals on closing, it's like, how much do we have in the pipeline? And then two, it's like, what activities do we need to be doing to control our own fate? So things like accounts touched or new opportunities owned or that kind of stuff, and putting metrics behind that to make sure that we're still doing the right activities, even though in some cases these evaluations will go dark for a while, things like that. So just looking at very different metrics.
So I imagine you guys probably describe this like crisply in your stages. Like, do you have like, say an organization is, in March or in April or whatever. And I think actually someone was explaining this to me the other day. It's like organizations will go live with their benefits on Jan 1, like you were saying. It's like chaos for that month or the month after. And then like HR is just, or like benefits, it's just kind of like in a coma for a month or so, kind of like they're shell shocked. And then they're ready to start coming out of their shells in like, March and April and May. So like, let's say that you've got, a hot deal where someone's like, yep, you know what, we have like a key initiative around, mental health within our organization in order to drive better retention, right? We don't want to have people like attriting, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to do like a really quick pilot on this or whatever, the process is. And now we're at verbal, right? But it's June, right? And like, maybe they're not going to sign until whatever you said. How do you, like, do you guys, is that like a stage at that point? Like, is pen to paper at that point? How does that work?
Yep. So the second they say they want to move forward with us, we're going to get them to sign as quickly as we can. But to add more like complexity and stress to this, what will happen is Q1, generally they're launching benefits. Q2, they're figuring out what they want to do. Q3 is what we call buying season, and Q4 buying season and decision. And Q4 is like procurement, and then it cycles. So while like at most companies, each quarter is its own thing, here it's much more annually based. But what will happen sometimes is a company will look at us in like March, April, and sometimes and then not want to take another call for like 6 months. And because of the consultant angle, which I can get into, or the benefits broker, we have much less control over the sales cycle the way the industry works. So it's more about tracking how many opportunities do we have, and looking at historical close rates to understand, are we on track in terms of getting to the revenues we need to.
So in that case where someone's like, they take the first call and they're like, they're juiced, but they don't want to talk for, 5 more months or whatever, presumably like that's probably signified by some sort of stage or whatever. And then like you guys have like some historical close rate out of that stage or whatever. Like I would imagine like you put these ops on ice where it's like, hey, look, they didn't say no, but they're not ready to sign or whatever. And so you guys just kind of like stack pipeline at different stages, even if like you might not be picking it back up again for 3 months or 4 months or what have you. Is that fair?
100% accurate, and it's enough to drive you crazy because
It really is. Like I'm like, oh my goodness.
it's the sales cycle here. The one big nuance is it's somewhat channel sales. We sell into benefits consultants. So if I was
like Mercer or like whoever,
WTW, so a ton of other ones. So they would be like, hey, you can pitch to our client. We have this client, then don't reach out to them for 6 months. And like every sales instinct in me is like, it's not a real op unless you're following up at least once a week, unless you have communication. And that's how I've been trained. But here we really are, we don't have as much control. And if we bother the consultant or we're too aggressive, they're not going to introduce us to the next guy. So it's much more how many good opportunities can we get and work them appropriately than it is my old saying was like, you lose a lot more deals being over aggressive than under aggressive, but that's not as applicable in this sale.
Yeah. Or you lose a lot more deals being under aggressive versus
Correct.
over aggressive.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You and I are like, I mean, time kills. It's like, yeah, it's almost like it's like, Stranger Things. It's like Bizarro World. Like, it's like the upside down when you've got a cyclical deal cycle, which essentially it's like cyclical plus channel, right? Whereas, like, use CV Insights as an example. Like, I love CV Insights, great product, because like I'm an information junkie, and I also love the sales organization there as well and all the diaspora. But when you've got an evangelical product, like Atrium's a great example of this, and like folks who work in, like, I don't know, like SaaS sales or whatever, generally speaking, we're like selling something that's like probably new, right? Like new and emergent. And so it's one of those things where, like, it's not on a budgetary cycle because the budget probably doesn't exist, right? So, like, I mean, think about like Percolate back in the day when you were there, or like 15.5 or whatever. Like, there weren't organizations like, oh, I need like talent management software. It's only the big companies had like Taleo and SuccessFactors. So it's like when you find someone and you're able to, like, through good discovery, get them to be like, yeah, the status quo does suck. It's like, great, let's like drive across the finish line, because like I'm not going to wait. And like in this case, it's the opposite, where it's like, hey, look, if you're like, honey badgering people, you're going to piss off the consultant here. Maybe not the client, because like, you probably want to stay top of mind, but like with them, but like the consultants are probably going to get a little grumped about that. So then it's actually interesting. Like, your reps are both, man, this is like double black diamond skiing. So it's like cyclical, and they're like channel reps and regular reps, right? So how do you stay, like, so then what are mechanisms by which they can stay top of mind with the consultants that they work with? One thing you said is like, don't be annoying to them, but you want to be like the appropriate amount of annoying, or like pleasantly annoying. Like, you're in there, you show up to them occasionally, they're like, oh, there's that Hoff guy again, he's lovely. What's the way of how do you coach your reps on like managing those like channel partners like that?
Exactly. It's all relationship. Whereas opposed to CB Insights, where we won because of product and sales acumen, here it's
Yeah.
all relationship. And so the way
Really?
to do it is to take consultants out to events, send them things, send them nice nurtures, that kind of stuff. And also just have them trust you. For consultants, their job is to look good for their client. So the more they like you helps, but also the more you can be credible to them, so that whether their client decides to go with Spring Health or not, they know if they bring you into the room, you're going to make them look good. So it's all about building that relationship with them. And that's what we spend a lot of time over the year doing, is building relationships with consultants.
How interesting. And so the mechanism by which to do that is at industry events. Is like the primary like vector by which that happens?
Everything. I mean, it can be industry events, it can be taking them out to dinner, taking them to shows or events or that kind of, or games, that kind of thing. It can be going into their office and doing lunch and learns. But those are the kind of metrics and things we're tracking over the course of the year to make sure we're still working, as a lot of these ops are in limbo of where they are.
Right, which I think is important, because like, look, I mean, you and I are kind of share a brain in this regard, where like my big thing is that sales excellence derives from a high quantity of high quality selling behavior, right? And you can measure that stuff. And so I think, like, as you're kind of pointing out there, like, even though pen can't necessarily get to paper, what are the actions that happen that are going to help facilitate that? And just aggressively honey badgering somebody's leg isn't going to be helpful there. But taking them out to dinner does, or coming in and doing a lunch and learn, or what have you. That's actually kind of interesting, because you guys are based in New York, but presumably these consultants are all over the place. Do you guys, like, are your reps very field orientated there, such that they can be like live with these consultants, or is it more just like people flying all over the place?
It's more people flying all over the place. Much larger travel budget, much higher funded than
T&E.
but we do have territories for sure.
Yeah.
But half the sales team is in New York, the other half is a little dispersed. But people can do what they need to do to get in person as much as they can.
I love it. Yeah. That's so, man, that's, yeah. So like get on the plane, because, and presumably you guys as like ASPs are high enough to make up for all that. I think all of this. So I think what's interesting about this is like CB Insights is more kind of like a sales organization after my heart, which is like solid mid-market sales motion, anywhere from like, 10 to 30K lands, right? Like really kind of quick turner. Like obviously, yeah, like getting up into the, there's like more enterprise deals, but usually there's a land and then kind of like expand against across different departments or whatever. And so you can kind of measure that in a different way, like you were kind of mentioning previously, where like, it's more activity centric or whatever. With Spring, you want to like be focused on the pipeline. And also I imagine is like, it's kind of like a different type of rep too. Like I imagine that the Spring rep really has to, and this is like, no shade against on CBI folks or what have you, but like it really feels like the Spring rep really has to be kind of like more nuanced, more like it's almost like channel management in that regard, and like working like a lot of different folks around a deal, whereas like CBI, it's kind of like brute force, right? Like we gotta like just doing lots of volume, especially because it's a new product. How do you like how do you select for reps that are going to be successful in one environment versus the other?
You explained it really well, and you know your stuff, and I'm with you. In my heart, I'm more of that SaaS seller and leader, but
We're so bad.
exactly, I love it. But you learn from each experience, and
Yeah.
I don't expect to be in the benefits world forever, but Spring has just been a rocket ship, and really interesting to learn from. But I definitely, in my heart, am in that kind
Yeah.
of 50, maybe the 250 sales motion, direct selling. But to answer your question, it's funny because at CBI, when we were interviewing, there were all these polished people that interview really well, and we did the like mock demo pitch and those kind of things, and a lot of them at CBI failed because they didn't have that grit and brute force you were talking
Yeah.
about. And it's funny because now those people at Spring do really well, because you need to be able to get in front of them.
Yes.
You need to be very more polished and have strong presentation skills and organization skills. And those people didn't do well at CBI, but do great at Spring. And there's people that you think will be successful anywhere because they will work so hard, but work ethic doesn't always win. And I would say that the reps that work the hardest at Spring aren't the ones that are necessarily the most successful. I'm not saying it's a cushy job, and you definitely need to work hard, but that's not the differentiator. It is polish, relationship building, charisma, those types of things.
That's so, man, yeah. And like, yeah, you can work hard. It's like you can work hard at that, but like there definitely needs to be like a skill profile to that. I think the thing that I observe is that yeah, it's like grit by itself with Spring is not going to get the deals done, right? Now you want to have grit and high activity, because you can imagine like having more meetings with more stakeholders surrounding a deal, like a 500K deal or what have you. That's going to be good if all those meetings are well executed, charismatically approached with like high panache and what have you, which I think kind of like points to just kind of like high ASPs in general. Whereas, because like I would presume that most organizations are probably going wall to wall with Spring, or at least maybe what they're doing is starting in a business unit or whatever. Whereas like with CBI, like an individual could buy, like an individual corporate development person, like say there's, I don't know, say there's like 5 corporate development people in a corp dev office or whatever. Maybe one guy or gal can be like, yeah, you know what, like I want to use CBI for like staying on top of what's happening in industry or whatever, and I'm just one of 5, but I go to my boss and I forget what a seat of CBI is, like maybe 10K or something like that, and like I get budgetary like approval for that CBI rep just has to convince that one person. And so like that's not necessarily like managing the politics of like, oh yeah, Bobby hates Susie, and like, so Bobby's gonna be your champion, but we really got to make sure that we can isolate Susie over here, and like all that sort of stuff that's more involved in like, the more advanced multi-stakeholder selling. Now, I think the thing that is important in both situations is probably that more sophisticated, like nuanced political sales motion can be learned if you're coachable, right? And yeah, so I think that's like always the higher order bit there. So do you guys have much of a promotion path from like SDR to like mid-market to enterprise at Spring? Because usually that can be a little bit of a challenge there to like have a career path if these deals are like such like double black diamond skiing from the beginning.
100%. And you're right, like our deal size is very few are below 6 figures, a lot are above 7 figures, and we can have some 8-figure deals. So it's awesome. Just very different. It's exciting. It's and we're building out that promotion path. I am, a huge fan of that SDR promotion path. That's how I started, and I believe anybody can get there. But in this sale too, the top AEs right now are ones that have been in the benefit space for a while and have those relationships. So it's not that we want to give everybody the path to grow. It's just different. And when I mentor a lot of AEs, and whenever they call me and they ask me for my advice and where they're going, and they obsess over the OTE and percentage of people hitting quota, I always ask them about the sales motion, because people need to understand that, like, what they like to sell into, and does that fit their skill set. And I believe anything can be learned. None of it's rocket science, but it matters having the right people in the right sales motion.
Yeah, I think that's a good like a good insight there, is like, what do you like selling? And because the average tenure of an account executive is going to be, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years or whatever. And then the other thing too that I like to coach kind of younger, kind of earlier career stage sellers on is really like the network that you're trying to drop into. And I think that's, you see this in New York like crazy. Like there's all the folks, I mean, you're former single platform, right? Like there's all the former single platform folks who are all over the place, right? And all the who then largely like were, a lot of those folks kind of came from Seamless, and like there's all the folks who like used to work at Splash and are now at a bunch of different other places as well. And so like selecting for a sales motion that's going to be like broadly applicable, and then also like a network that's really going to set you up for success, is probably more important than like, oh, these guys are saying that like, my OTE over here is going to be like 180 and you're offering me 160. It's just like, yeah, man, like generally speaking, like take it from me, you're going to be at like, some years you're going to be at 200 and some years you're going to be at like 130, and like that just kind of is what it is. But the thing that's going to like, be useful for you long term is the people that you're able to work with, right?
100%. Like the last 4 jobs I've had, I haven't had to interview. I mean, I've had to do some informal interviewing, but I've gotten in the door all through connections of people I've worked with in the past. So it's the network of people you have at these jobs, and the sales leaders and your peers are so important to the long-term success of your career. That's job stability today, is connections more than anything else.
Yeah. Changing gears a little bit here. I know that we're kind of coming up at the end of the year right now. And a lot of organizations are like thinking about their annual planning, while at the same time they're contending with the fact that like there's kind of like some monkey business going on in the economy and what have you. How do you think, as a sales leader who's like been around the block a few times and kind of like seen the best laid plans of mice and men, or what is it like, man plans, God laughs, right? Like what are your thoughts on kind of like annual planning now that we're kind of approaching that part of the season?
Yeah, I've been through it a bunch now, and I've gotten it right sometimes and not other times. I think the line I always say is, we can make it work on a spreadsheet. We're like, yeah, this works on a spreadsheet, and it's easy to show the number of AEs, the number of BDRs, what the quota is, the quota hedge if you have that, all of that. But if that's not a reality, then what are you doing if you're just trying to make something work for the board? And I know that you need goals and you don't want to overpay, but I'm a firm believer in, if goals are too high, you're just going to lose reps. And if people didn't hit quota a certain year, or you're adding a lot more reps and you don't have enough top of the funnel, why are you adding more quota just to make it work on a spreadsheet? And so I've found that, like, every year at Spring, I've only been here a couple of years, but also CBI reps, if they feel like the goals are attainable, going to blow it out of the water. And if the goals aren't attainable, then they're not even going to come close often, or you're going to lose them. So it's a matter of coming up with the right plan and looking at, as I've gone higher up, like, what's the cost? What's it going to cost us to pay these AEs and all of that? But you have to look at with a sense of reality and not just the spreadsheet approach, which so many companies do.
Yeah, that's one of the things that kind of like drives me insane, is when you have like top-down driven models that aren't necessarily informed by like win rate.
Exactly.
Or right, we're just like, oh yeah, you know, we're or like, you know, rep utilization, or like, oh yeah, you know, we have an expectation that our reps can do, you know, 800K a year, whatever. It's like, oh, okay, like, where'd that come from? Right? Like, is that because like your win rate crossed with ASP crossed with like op ownership can get you there? Or did you just kind of like, you know, pull that out of thin air, you know? And I think that like a lot of the times, so I think actually there's an interesting question there, which is, as a sales leader, how do you push back against something that might be kind of manufactured out of whole cloth, when, like, you know, from people who may not have the most experience with respect to sales math and what have you?
It's data. Like, for example, at Spring right now, we have a number of different lead sources. The number one is what we've talked about, the ones that come through consultant, but we also have
Love it.
some demo requests. We also have some outbound, but when it's through a consultant, it's the best because, you know, there's a real client doing a real evaluation. So when we're looking at close rates, we need to look at what's the close rate for each channel, then how many ops are we expecting from each one? And so if we want to get more consultant ops, we have a team.
What are we going to do?
Exactly. How are we going to focus on that channel? And we can't just get more BDR ops, which have a lower close rate, and expect to hit the same number. So it's being able to present the data and have facts to explain either the goal is not attainable, or to do that. The answer is not the number of AEs. I've always felt the number of AEs is a vanity metric. It's more how many strategic alliances reps, BDR reps, and AEs combined do we need to hit the number, and not just showing AEs with quotas on a spreadsheet.
Right, because like, right, it's kind of like, to use a car metaphor here, it's like, oh, this is like a V10 engine. It's like, yeah, but you've got you know, 2 fuel injectors.
Exactly.
Seems like that would kind of be problematic. You're gonna have a bunch of cylinders that are not firing appropriately. Well, so one of the things that's kind of interesting with Spring is, because it's like this huge like time offset from when, you know, an organization may be, you know, articulating interest and what have you, to when actual pen goes to paper. And like, how do you know that deal is like real? Like, how do you know that you're winning? How do you know that you're losing, especially in a situation where like part of your sales motion is literally them going like dark for potentially many months?
And you don't sometimes. So a lot of it depends on the relationship with the
nerve-wracking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's taken years off my life, but a lot of it has to do with, if you can back channel through the relationship with the consultant, then that's great. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. But when I'm talking to an AE on like, in call it March or April, what are your 10 best deals for the year and where they finish? September, October, reps are like, this op came back to me out of nowhere. I didn't even think it was real. So it's really about again, how many ops you have, and then we have a playbook of different things you can do to
Yeah.
close them, or things to stay top of mind, run events, reach out to the consultant, send a video, have our CEO reach out, a ton of different things. But it's like, are we doing everything on every op? Because literally a consultant could say you could pitch to a client and then don't reach out for 6 months. And we need to do what we can to try to increase the chances and back channel all of that. But sometimes you really don't know.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Like this is something that I struggle with, and I don't feel that I mean, as a technologist, I'm kind of the worst. I'm always like, oh, what's the like technology way of solving this? But I feel that there's like not a really effective way of doing pipeline management. And what I mean by that is like there's all sorts of like tools that'll help you um, like keep track of your pipe, I guess. It's just like, so like use us as an example. I mean, we're kind of like ridiculous, right? So like, you know, we use Atrium Op Health. We also use SalesLoft deals, mainly more for kind of like updates and kind of like things like that. We also use Scratchpad, not really for the like for the pipe review use cases. It's more for like taking notes or what have you. But I think what's kind of, but to your point, if you've got this portfolio of opportunities, like really you want to be like taking actions against them, right? Like doing, you know, football moves or what have you. And I don't feel that there's like really easy ways of doing that. And especially in a situation like you guys where, so like the traditional way of doing that is like you only have so many opportunities that are in your pipe at any given point in time. Like maybe it's 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever. Like 50 is a lot, right? Because like it's too much. And so, and then it's like, look, if they don't get back to me, like if I send them like 4 emails and they don't get back to me and they're like not opening my email or whatever, close loss, get it out of there, right? Like that's more like the CBI or like Atrium or kind of like the more modern SaaS like sales motion. But in you guys' case, like you literally can't do that, right? So it's more like you're trying to like garden this like this big portfolio. What are the mechanisms? What are the scaled? Are there any kind of like scaled mechanisms by which you can kind of like, you know, it's almost it's like a sprinkler, like go across your entire portfolio of opportunities, or do you just have to do it manually, or like, you know, how do you coach your reps on that front?
Yeah, there still is pipeline management. It's just different because you don't know exactly what the ones are most likely to close, but you know what the best ops are, because for us, it's all about employee size of the largest ops because it's a per employee per month cost. So if
Sure,
the first thing I would look at with any AE is what are the ops that came from consultant sorted by employee size? And it's like,
sure,
what's our plan there? When's the last time we heard any communication from the consultant? Have we thought about this or that? And you're right, it's watering, and then we'll get stuff from marketing or we'll do stuff on our own to send nurturers or do webinars or do things to still try to stay top of mind. So I still like to look at like last touch of the consultant or last touch of the op, but sometimes I'll be in a meeting and they said, hey, don't reach out for 6 months. That's when they're going to be reevaluating. And that's when it's like, okay, it's okay to not do that much. It's okay if on a tracker, it's showing no activity for a month, when before that would drive me crazy, but you can still prioritize the ops just based on different data than what we would look at CBI.
that's funny, man. You're right. Like taking years off your life. I'm like, it's taking years off my life just like thinking about how you guys manage this manage a sales motion. So I think one thing that kind of pops to mind there is kind of like sales is such a momentum thing,
Yep.
because like it can be very much like it can be, it's like it's cold out there, right? Like and then because it's, and also because sales is oftentimes um like confidence inspired, where success begets success. um if you're not having success or there aren't indicators of success, and of course like the thing that we all think about as like an indicator of success is like closing the deal, right? Like close one, ding, bang the gong. um if you don't have that going on because you're going the entire year without, you know, necessarily closing deals, I mean there will be some, but then it's like a feeding frenzy at the end. How do you keep morale up in the face of that, such that people still have high esprit de corps and like have the backbone to execute their calls really well and like have the confidence to inspire and what is it, like sales is a transfer of enthusiasm. Like they have to be enthusiastic to transfer it to the prospect, even though I haven't closed the deal in 3 months. And I wouldn't expect to. Like, how do you keep morale up in the environment like that?
It's a really good question, and it's the most important thing we need to do. And there's a couple of things that we do. One is we run a lot of contests to have people feel like they can win prizes, win a little bit of money. I would, in the early part of this year, I would send an email that showed an Atrium dashboard of like who had more meetings and this kind of stuff. And I don't like to lead by like pinning people against each other, but just seeing some leaderboards and things like
No,
that.
celebrating. Yeah,
Exactly. And then we do we have reps talk about all the time, the more tenured reps, about how you have to give it time, how you have to trust the process. And we reiterate that message. And I say all the time, it's the work that we're doing now that we're not
yes,
seeing that's going to lead to the success. So we've ingrained that in people. So they almost have this like FOMO approach of like, if I'm not doing the work now, it's not going to pay off later, which is the
good.
truth. And then it's just rallying the team together. It's having people feel part of something bigger than themselves. I've always had a team mission that I present in every meeting and that kind of stuff. So we do what we can to keep the team focused, but you're right, for reps, they're not closing for a while, and it's hard, especially for people that are going through it for the first time.
Yeah, for sure. I think yeah, one of my AEs at Talent Bin, my last software company, is a gentleman named Brad Snyder. He leads inside sales for Redis Labs in Austin, and he's a big basketball player, and so he was a big fan of like all the like systems coaches, right? So like Popovich and Coach K from Duke, I want to say, and it's like trust the system, trust the process, trust the system, etc. And so I think what can be really helpful there is a couple of things. Like one, people have to believe the system, right? And so the way that you characterize that to them is like, hey, look, like, let's look at this historical data. Like, I know that it feels super whack right now that you haven't closed any deals, but like, let's go ahead and jump back a year, right? And let's look at these reps right here who are still here. And let's look at the number of deals that they were getting to, proposal or like whatever mid-stage it was in April, May, June, July. Let's go ahead and look at that, right? And then let's look at what they ended up closing. And like, it's not just Bobby's magical or whatever. It's like, yeah, we're going to do, like, look at this. Here's the 8 reps. So it's like, hey, look, here's the process, right? Here's the process. And so then it's like, okay, cool. I believe you, Hoff, right? You're not, blowing rainbows up my butt, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to measure the precursors, right? And we're saying like, and we're going to measure the precursors, and then we're also going to like celebrate those precursors, right? And then one thing that you can actually do, and we actually do this at Atrium, is you can compensate the precursors. So so one of the things that's like particularly cool about Atrium is it takes like 5 minutes to set up an account. Like any sales manager or sales leader could just turn on an Atrium account through a read-only connection to their CRM. We call that lighting up data. And so what we do is we actually spiff our AEs on data lights, that we call that, because it's a really, really, really good leading indicator to eventually close winning a deal, right? So not only do we measure them, right? Like we measure how many opportunities are getting to to like how many opportunities are being created by the SDRs, how many are getting to Disco Plus, right? SAO by the AEs, how many are getting to Data Light, and then of course then you have like laggers, like how many are getting to proposals, and of course like deals or what have you. So you measure that, right? And you measure kind of progress towards it. You celebrate that, but you can even like compensate the precursors as well. And what that does is it focuses minds. Like obviously you don't want to compensate it like wildly so that someone can like make a ton of money on these precursors and never actually get the deals across the line. But I think that that's some of the mechanisms by which you can do that. What are some of the key like parts of you guys' sales motion that you really bird dog to make sure that those leading indicators are being hit, such that come September, October, November, the deals start dropping?
Yeah, that's a really good point, we don't do it as part of the comp plan. We do it as more of spiffs and contests, but we could
Yeah.
take it to the next level.
Well, I mean, a spiff is like an informal comp plan, but yeah, for sure. Like
Yeah.
it drives attention, right?
100%. A's well, anyone will do what you pay them to do and what they're incentivized to do.
Yeah.
For us, those things could be anything like meetings with consultants, events that you're running, proposals sent, because sometimes a consultant will say, just send a proposal.
Yep.
And then that can go dark for a while. So it's those kind of things of activities with consultants, that would be the most valuable activity
Yeah.
drive if we've done contests on.
Do you guys model those like individually as event types or like task types in Salesforce?
We did it for a contest, and yes, there are different task types. We got to get a little more specific, but all the stuff is logged.
Yeah, the problem, I mean, this is always the challenge. So, one of the like big value propositions of Atrium is like you have all these metrics that already work out of the box, but then you have people who create these like very specific, like sales motion specific like actions, right? Like, a consultant lunch and learn, right? It's like we don't do those, and like our other customers don't do that, but like that's important for spring, right? We're actually working on supporting more broadly like arbitrary event types and arbitrary task types, and then you can create Atrium metrics off of that. But always the challenge with those then is like getting people to like actually log them appropriately, which I feel that almost like compensating on them almost makes it such that like they get logged, which kind of feels like a ridiculous sentence where it's like, oh my God, you should be like having these lunch and learns or whatever, because it's going to help you close this deal, and like you're not logging them appropriately, but you will if I give you a $50 Amazon gift card for it.
100%. Or if A's are competitive in nature, like at Percolate, we had field
Yes.
reports, at CB Insights, we had meaningful conversations. There's all these different custom metrics, the way you want to call them. And if you just have a leaderboard on it, whether you even incentivizing for it or not, people are going to want to be at the top.
Yeah, for sure. That's so funny. Like, oh, actually, I gotta share this hysterical story with you. So when I was doing, when we were doing our original research for Atrium back in, geez Louise, at this point it's 2016. Wow. Um, and I was doing like we did about 150 customer interviews, and I remember having this wonderful like interview with this guy. It's like a very, very senior sales operations leader. It's the guy named RJ Vissers. He's hysterical. He's this like really grumpy Dutch guy, because like tenured sales operations people, they've seen like every way that like reps and sales leaders can like do crazy stuff. So of course they're going to be like really cynical. And so what was funny was like RJ was like, oh yeah, back, because the interview questions were things like how do you use data to measure performance and like drive better performance, etc. He's like, oh man, Pete, like I got a funny story for you. Back in the day before we even had Siebel, right? So like forget Salesforce, forget Siebel, like on-prem CRM. This is like back in the day before they even had like, if they just had contact managers. He's like, I could measure the performance of my reps based on their expense reports. And I was like, what do you mean, RJ? Like, tell me more about that. He's like, oh yeah, I could always tell which reps were gonna outperform quota or not based on their expense report volume. And then also, but it wasn't just like the aggregate amount of expenses they had, like how much of their T&E budget they were using up, because it couldn't be like a small number of like really bougie dinners or whatever. It had to be like a lot of breakfasts, a lot of lunches, a lot of dinners, for like the unique number of like expense reports for like meals or whatever, coffees. And literally as he was telling me this, I was just like, oh my gosh, what you guys were doing was you were paying people to like log meetings, and the mechanism by which the meeting was being logged was the expense report. He's like, yep, it was like expense reporting as like performance analysis and CRM. Isn't that ridiculous?
That's so exactly. That was like innovative for the time. That's funny. One story that you got me to think of that I learned this year about constraints that's somewhat similar is we have a very high travel budget because we want people to go in person. And so I was telling
Totally.
people all year, you have unlimited budget, do what you need to do. Like if it's anything crazy, run it by me, but like we're coming from a place of yes. And
Get on a plane.
nobody was doing anything because we didn't give enough direction. Then when I said, okay, everybody needs to spend up to 5K this quarter or this first half of the year, then everybody started doing it and that led to more activity. So your story made me think of that, of like constraints really help versus ambiguity.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, being prescriptive is like so critical, right? Like, especially with and in you guys' case, you don't really have junior reps, but anytime you have a situation where you need to be, and this is something that I've come to realize around like sales management, is that sales management is very much selling on it unto itself. And so in general, we don't ask prospects what they want to do, right? Hoff, it would be my recommendation that we start with this right here, right? Because what we found from our customers is that that's the most effective way of going about this. What are your reactions to that, right? Like, don't do like, what do you want to do? It's like, I don't know. I want to hang up on this call. And the same thing is with your reps, right? It's like, hey, like figure it out, guys. It's like, cool. So here's the situation. If it gets to this stage right here, generally speaking, get on a plane. Like go take it. Like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be in Indianapolis or whatever. Oh, you are? No, I wasn't, but now I'm going to be, right? And would you like to go to, would you like to go to Harrah's Steaks or whatever? Like, hey, and I think this is where having a crisp sales playbook can be really effective, because if you don't, having like guardrails there, or like not even guardrails, because the thing that we're not talking about is not people like doing stupid stuff. It's more like, hey, we want them to follow the recipe. How do you guys do you guys have like any sort of guided selling setup, or like is your sales playbook in like Google Docs or maybe like HighSpot or something like that, or do you have other stuff that you guys use to kind of like help them kind of paint by numbers?
Yeah, there is a few docs of different plays you can run, and then we'll talk through like, here's the playbook. These are the options of things we can do. Which ones have you done? So people know the
Sure.
options available to them. And then what's appropriate at different stages and things like that. And that can only get more automated or systematic as we grow.
Yeah. The way that we do that is we use it's funny, like we use mutual planning software. And it's funny because like people think of it as mutual plan software, which is like great. Like it's good for, collaborative selling with your prospect or whatever. You can like arm your champions. But probably the more impactful thing that we found is that like it's like a checklist, right? Because like stages is insufficient. Like, oh, there's 5 stages or whatever, right? Like, no, like because there's so many different things that you can do in a deal. Oh, did you remember to do this? Did you remember to do this? And so having more of like an Asana checklist or what have you on a per deal basis can be really powerful for that. We happen to use software called Accord, but there's a number of other solutions that help with this as well. Like there's a gentleman named Mark Furstein in New York there who used to where did he used to sell? I want to say,
I think.
yeah, it's Recapped, and yeah, exactly, and like he used to be a sales leader at Log Me In, I want to say. Like I'm maybe I'm misremembering that, but like he comes from like a very legit maybe it was Citrix actually. He comes from a very legit sales background, but like when you have a complicated sales motion, relying on your reps to be like, oh yeah, what should I do right now, is like it's kind of a sucker's game versus cool, like go to your checklist. Oh, here we are right here. Got it. I'm supposed to zest the lime now. Right? I'm supposed to get on a plane and go take someone to dinner in Indianapolis or like, or Atlanta or, fill in the blank.
And reps want that. Like reps want more guidance it takes to succeed, and all of that. And so that's stuff that we're trying to implement more and more of.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Mike, we're kind of wrapping up on time here. Any kind of like parting thoughts that you might want to share with our audience who was able to join us here today, for the folks who are going to watch this later on?
I think my biggest learning from Spring is it's more different than the other sales I've been in. And so just understanding that the data you look at, the reps you need, how you manage, all of that is just different based on the sale. And while that might sound obvious, make sure you're aware of that as you're looking into different roles or things that excite you, because that's so important to be in the right position for you.
Yeah, for sure. Cool, man. Well, Mike, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. You have an amazing time in the Maldives. I expect to see. I want to. I want to see pictures. So text me. A picture of you and your wife having a cocktail. Folks, please join us again. In the new year, we're going to be having Michael Zhang from Candidate Lab, so the co-founder and COO, is going to be joining us. Hoff, have a great holiday season and close the year strong. Okay.
You too. Thanks so much, Pete. Thanks for having me.
See ya.